Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Sara Wolf, talking about her latest novel, Heavenbreaker. Welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett, as it says right there on the screen, and I am also an author. My latest book is actually The Tangled Stars, which came out in 2022, an ebook and audiobook from Daw Books. It's a far future outer space science fiction adventure featuring an AI-uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. So you'll want to check that out. At least I hope you will. I'm also a publisher. My publishing company is Shadowpaw Press, and I always like to start these podcasts by talking about some of the books I've published there. I have a stack of them right here. It just happened to. This one I want to mention first, Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. This is a collection of science fiction and fantasy short stories by authors who were guests of this podcast during its fifth year. Sherry Lynn Kenyon, David Boop, Michael Brent Collings, a whole bunch of great names in here, Lavi Tidhar. And it's also illustrated by Calgary artist Wendy Nordell. This was kickstarted last year, and I just completed the Kickstarter for Volume 5, so it will be going ahead. It will come out to the backers this fall and will be out general public probably in the new year. So something to look forward to. Another great collection of authors who I won't attempt to list because I will forget somebody for sure. A couple of other books that came out recently. This one, The Good Soldier by Nir Yaniv, is, I think... MASH meets Starship Troopers in outer space, or Catch-22 in outer space, however you want to look at it. It's very much a mobile infantry kind of a world, but that's not where the story goes at all. It's very funny. I recommend The Good Soldier, military science fiction satire by Nir Yaniv. Also coming out at about the same time as those, which was back in January, February, was this young adult dystopian science fiction novel called The Headmasters. It's about alien parasites that have taken over people who were at a research facility in northern Ontario. We don't know what happened in the rest of the world very much in this book, but things are not good where they are, where these things have attached themselves. And it's about a girl and how she finds a way to maybe free themselves from these things. So read The Headmasters by Mark Morton. And then the most recent ones, there's a new book by the late, great Canadian science fiction fantasy author Dave Duncan. Try to get my fingers out of his name there. The Trader's Son. It is science fiction, straightforward science fiction, set in a colony where everything that could go wrong is about to go wrong. And the Trader's Son, this young man who's the son of a notorious trader, may be the only one who can save the colony. So, The Trader's Son. And then finally, this is my biggest recent release. And you may even have run across this one already because it was an audiobook, audiobook original by Robert J. Sawyer. It's his 25th novel, The Downloaded. He's a Hugo and Nebula award-winning Canadian science fiction author, best-known Canadian science fiction author, I would say. And this one, as I said, came out as an Audible audiobook original with an A-list cast that included Brendan Fraser and others like that. So you can check out the audiobook, but now the print book is available through my Shadowpaw Press. There's also an e-book, which you can also find. So, The Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer. It's about two groups of people whose consciousnesses were uploaded into a quantum computer. One was a group of astronauts that thought they were on an interstellar mission, and the other is a group of prisoners who were serving their time virtually. And they all get uploaded, I guess. They're uploaded into the computer. They're downloaded back into real life, and they discover things have gone horribly wrong while they were in there, and they have to try to save the Earth from destruction. So, The Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer. And I have many more great books coming out. The next ones, which I'll be talking about soon, are by Governor General's award-winning author Arthur Slade, Canadian Chill's middle grade series. I have a couple of books of poetry and a literary novel coming out this year as well, this spring and summer. And then looking into the fall, there's more great science fiction lined up. And I will be having some of these authors on the Worldshapers as we go along to talk about their latest books. Anyway, that's Shadowpaw Press, shadowpawpress.com. I'll give all the links and stuff at the end of the podcast here. But that's enough of talking about that stuff and my stuff. Let's move on to this episode's guest. And I will, of course, as I always do, put on my reading glasses so I can read this. We're talking to Sara Wolf today. Sara Wolf lives in Portland, Oregon, where the sun can't get her anymore. When she isn't pouring her allotted life force into writing, she's reading, accidentally burning houses down while baking, or making faces at her highly appreciative cat. She is the author of the NYT best-selling Lovely Vicious series and the Bring Me Their Hearts series. So let's talk to Sara, and as you'll see, she will be appearing somewhat differently than most authors do. Let's talk to Sara. So, Sara, welcome to the Worldshapers.
I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Now, this is a first. I have not interviewed an animated character before. So why are you doing that?
So this is such a funny story. Basically, my publisher was like, "Hey, you need to get on the internet more." Before Heavenbreaker came out, they were like, or before the deal went through, right? They were like, "You need to be on social media more. We don't see you very much." And I was like, "Well, okay. How about I play video games on the internet?" And they were like, "Sure, as long as you're on the internet." So I started streaming on Twitch, which is a video game platform, using a face camera. But every time I streamed, I had to put on makeup for like 2 hours in order to get any sort of like traction with like followers and like viewers and stuff. And so I got tired of doing that every single like day. So I was like, you know what? Can I get an animated avatar? And indeed, there was an animated avatar. And so here we are today, ladies and gentlemen. We've fallen down the rabbit hole of virtual tubing.
I don't know. Maybe I should start doing that, and then it could be an animated character interviewing other animated characters.
It's kind of nice. Like you don't have to worry about like your hair or anything. And you get to have creative control. Like I'm a wolf. Literally, my last name is Wolf, so now I'm a wolf. Yippee!
Yay! Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's. I usually try to find some sort of connection, but we have never met. So I don't think I have one this time, except that we both write, obviously. Yeah. So let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. And where are you from?
Where am I from?
Where'd you grow up? How did you get started in all this writing stuff? Tell me your life story.
Yeah, let me just like really quickly break 30 plus years down for you. So basically I grew up in Hawaii. When I was a child, I was born in Seattle, and then my dad got divorced. My mom was like, you know what, I'm going back to where I was raised, because she was an army brat, right? So, as they call them, so they say. And so she took me back to Hawaii where she grew up, and, it was such a different experience.
I'll bet.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. But Hawaii still has a very fond place in my heart, and it sort of shaped who I am as a person, right? Because there is a lot of Japanese culture over there. There's a lot of Chinese culture, just a lot of Filipino cultures, a lot of different, it's sort of a mixing pot of different cultures. And that's how I got started with writing in general. Actually, it's the same. It's funny how it's all connected, right? Basically, I was a kid, was sort of left to fend for myself. So I started reading books. I read a lot. One of my favorites is the Wind on Fire series. I also really like Terry Pratchett. And that sort of slowly evolved into video games, right? Because video games were getting popular when I was a kid. And then that evolved into things like anime, right? And manga. So like here we are as an anime wolf girl. It all kind of comes full circle, right? So basically I got really, really into Pokemon. I'm sure you know about Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
I got really into it as a child, and I started writing fan fiction on forums. And at the time, I think I didn't expect to get as popular as I did on the forums. I was about 12 years old when I started writing. And I started writing, I started getting, I don't know, by the end of it, when I was 17, I finally finished the series. It ended up being 1.2 million words.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. And it had like 345,000 views, which back in the day, in the baby days of the internet, right? When forums were big, that was a lot of views, right? Mm-hmm. So it was funny because I released a chapter every week, which meant that like I was sort of training myself, unbeknownst to me, I was training myself to write novels, essentially, like to sit down and just write chapter upon chapter and make these huge behemoth novels. So I got to, I want to say I was 18. I was like thinking about my high school graduation. I was like, okay, what do I really want to do, right? And the original plan was to be an English teacher, because I really do love literature, and I just love like all the things that encapsulate it, like the history behind books, like why books come to be, right? Like things like Oscar Wilde, like what was his life like, right? And things like that. But then I was like, you know what I really want to do? I really want to write fan fiction for the rest of my life. And then I realized you can't do that. You can't monetize that very easily back then,
No.
at least, right? Yeah. And so I went to community college for about 3 years to learn math. Because I was so terrible at math, I couldn't transfer into a real college. And so my dad had me on a regimen of community college math. And I was like, actually, you know what? I'm going to sit in your basement and write books for 4 years instead and try to get published. And he thought it was a ludicrous idea, right? Like he thought there's no way, right? He wanted me, he was like, you need to get this job. So I was applying to jobs and all this at the same time. And then I finally got picked up, and it was sort of just this surreal experience where I was like, did I really do this? Did I really manage to sell a real book like at a professional setting? So yeah, I learned a lot thanks to the internet. I think one of the forums I learned the most from was Absolute Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one of the behemoth of writing forums back in the day. And they had the most useful thing there, besides all the advice from other authors, was this huge thread of query letters. I don't know if you've ever remember that, but it was like a huge thread of successful query letters. And so I was so confused as to why I wasn't getting responses from agents. And nobody could really tell me answers. Like nobody could tell me how to write a query letter. But by looking at that thread, studying it, seeing which query letters were successful, I started to catch on to what concepts in general were also successful, right? Like it's not just about, when you write a query letter, it's not just about the writing the letter. It's also about the concept, like what sells. And from there, I started to formulate like a plan to get published, to write a book that would fit publishing, right? That would be irresistible to publishing, essentially. And I learned how to write a query letter from there. So shout out Absolute Right. And here we are.
I haven't. Well, of course, obviously, I'm older than you, and also not animated. So
just a little bit, yeah.
So my when I started writing, none of that stuff existed. But there was a fellow DAW author, Joshua Palmatier, who actually is currently doing a lot of kickstarting of anthologies that I've been in a few of.
Congratulations.
But he once did a query letter project where because he knew a lot of authors who had successfully sold, and he collected these successful query letters from authors, including me, who had sold, either sold based on the query letter or at least got the first look based on the query letter. So but that was. I think he just put it on his blog is how that one worked. So I was part of that. There's also cool. He also did a synopsis one where we all posted synopses.
God, I hate those.
Oh,
I hate those.
Synopsia? I don't know what the plural is.
Synopsis.
But it was very interesting. And so I'm actually going to ask you a little bit about your planning process, but let's go back to that first sale.
Sure.
So what was it?
I don't know if I can, because I write under a pen name now. It was a previous name I had. Okay. So I don't want to link the two. But
what kind of book was it?
It was a thriller. It was a young adult thriller, about a con artist girl. And it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It was very fun. It was very moving. It was very sad. It taught me a lot about writing, right? Thrillers, you sort of have to, formulate backwards. Right? Like it's not a mystery, right? Like a mystery you build up slowly. Thrillers you formulate backwards. You already know what happens, right? You already know something bad's going to happen. And you just need to find out what happens after that. So thrillers are really interesting to me. And I had a lot of fun writing it. So yeah.
And why YA? Now I know why I started with YA. It's because I started writing as a teenager.
Yeah.
And I wrote stories about teenagers, and I grew up, but my characters didn't.
I love that. I love that sentence. That's a good one. I want a shirt with that. I want a mug with that on. I grew up, but my characters didn't. Yeah. So YA, I was at a very formative point in my life, right? Early 20s. I wanted to explore. For me, YA is so cool because you could every character is growing so much. Like the exponential growth is really exciting as a writer to write about. For the characters, and I think my dialogue suits YA. I guess I could say I'm just immature, but I absolutely love YA.
Is that so? Are all of your books YA? Would you typify them that way?
Yes, I think most of them are. Heavenbreaker is my first adult title, actually. Technically, it would be classified as new adult, but because that's not actually really a thing quite yet, it is technically an adult book. So yeah, all of my previous titles are YA / they grow into college. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a trilogy called The Masks of Agreement under a pen name, E.C. Blake. It's an open pen name. And the character is a 15-year-old girl.
Oh,
All the characters are teenagers, but Daw
mhm.
didn't have a YA line, and so it was published in the adult fantasy market, and that did affect the way I wrote it. I mean, I did make it a
Yeah,
little perhaps grittier than I might have chosen
darker.
for
Mm.
a YA original,
That's so cool.
but yeah. So even when I'm writing adult novels, I'm still writing young characters,
Yeah,
generally
it's
speaking.
true. I'm the same way with Heavenbreaker. I mean, this is very much an adult novel. Heavenbreaker is not for kids. But like while I was writing this, I was like, this could be YA if I wanted it to. You know, like you always have to make that choice when you're writing. You're like, this could be YA, this could be
Yeah.
adult, but you have to make the choice going into it. Otherwise, it's going to affect, the whole plot.
Well, you're talking about the tone and the dialogue.
Mm.
I actually had an adult book. The character's like 27 or something like that,
Mm.
and or I think she's 27, and for some reason it got shortlisted or longlisted for a YA award. And I thought,
Ah,
how did that? How
wait,
did you
what?
take that as
Wait,
YA? I don't know.
wait, what? That's so
Yeah, so there's
silly.
no accounting for the
Yeah.
vagaries of how people will perceive your work, I guess.
True. Very true. Yeah. It's all up to like at that point, it's out of our hands and into marketing's hands. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like I always say, like readers are going to decide how they want the book in their head, right? Like readers are going to decide how they perceive the book, and there's nothing we can do about that. And that's part of the fun, though. That's part of the fun as an author.
Well, somewhere along the way, you became a best-selling author, I
I
guess.
did. Yeah.
So, how did it develop from that first book then?
So I started my pen name, and then I published a series. I was so frustrated by traditional publishing, as you know, there are frustrations in traditional publishing, as putting it lightly. And I was so frustrated, and I just knew that this book I was writing currently was not going to make it in the traditional publishing sphere. There had been nothing. Not that there was nothing like it, but it would be a very hard sell, right? So I wanted to circumvent that. I kind of wanted to give it a chance at being born. So I indie published it myself under a pen name, and it got really, really popular. And I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute, whoa. And so I came to my agent and I was like, hey, listen, I've got this series. It's pretty popular. Would you like to resell it? Like, would you like to offer it to publishing houses if they want to repackage it, right? And she was like, sure. So we resold it based on the numbers to Entangled. And that is my lovely Vicious series. It's a contemporary romantic comedy. And it's very close to my heart. I think it's this book that put me on the map. It's got a lot of my humor style in it. It's got a lot of, I wrote it because I don't know, looking back on it, you're always embarrassed of your like first breakout book, really, because you're like, everyone's seen this, right? Like everyone has seen this now. There's no hiding who I am, so to speak. So I'm not embarrassed per se, but I have changed so much as a writer. It's hard to go back and read it. But at the same time, I'm proud of it because it's maybe the funniest work I've ever written. So yeah, it's a good book and I enjoy it. So yeah, so that's how I got started with Entangled. And then I believe the second book in the series, the repackage, got on the New York Times bestseller list. I was not expecting that at all. But they like emailed me and they're like, hey, it's on the New York. I was like, what? You're kidding, right? So yeah, that series has had quite the journey, and I'm proud of it.
Well, let's talk about. I keep wanting to call it Heartbreaker,
You're so good.
Heavenbreaker.
Yeah.
So, and I guess the place to start is with the description of it without giving away anything you don't want to give away.
Okay. Yeah. So the elevator pitch for this book, so to speak, is that it is a revenge story about a girl who's riding a giant robot against a space monarchy to avenge her murdered mother.
That sounds intriguing.
Yeah. It's the longer tagline is basically if it's a giant robot, it's about a girl who wants revenge riding a giant robot in a space jousting tournament. So giant robots joust against each other, and only the nobles are allowed to joust, right? In these giant robots, because these robots are very expensive and it's a status symbol. And so it's treated like a very big competition. And for every win she gets, one of the people who murdered her mother will die. That's the deal she's made with this mysterious noble.
So, is this your first science fiction novel per se?
It is. So I've always been terrified of sci-fi. because it seems so intimidating from the outside, right? I've always wrote fantasy. My Bring My Heart series was my Bring Me Their Hearts, my hearts. Bring Me Their Hearts was my first fantasy series. And I love fantasy because I've read a lot of it, right? But sci-fi, I'm a little bit newer to it. The Expanse is something that I
Hmm.
watched and I really liked, and I went back and read the book, and I was like, wow, you know.
I just finished reading the entire, what is it, however many books it is. I just
Yeah,
finished
I
reading the
have to.
entire series.
I'm on like number 2, and there's so many. I'm like, I'm intimidated. Did you like it?
Yes, actually, and
Mm.
it's interesting because of all the adaptations of books I have seen, The
Mhm.
Expanse is the closest to the books, uh,
Yeah.
which is not too surprising because the author, I mean authors, because it's two
Mhm.
people writing under one name, were very much involved in the production. And
I
there's
had no
also a
idea.
collection of short stories, and I had wondered in the series why there were some things that didn't seem to be in the book, and it's because
Yeah.
they even dramatized some of the short stories they had written set in
Oh,
that world. So yeah, I highly recommend finishing the whole thing if you have
yeah.
time in your busy
Of
schedule.
course. Yeah. I'm on the second book right now, and I'm just like, I'm so excited to get through the rest of them. Yeah. So yeah, The Expanse really like showed me that like sci-fi was a thing. Before then, my experience and my exposure to sci-fi was primarily like anime, right? Like giant robot animes.
Mm.
Giant robots are very prominent in anime, right?
Yes.
But and in the West, like we don't really have a sort of an analog. We have, I think the closest we come to is Pacific Rim, right? That's
Yeah.
like the biggest media zeitgeist I can remember having a giant robot in it, right? So when people are asking like what kind of giant robots, I always say Pacific Rim, right? Just for ease of like access.
I guess
Uh,
Transformers kind of, but
Transformers, yeah, for sure, but like those robots are like they're not ridden by humans.
yeah, they're not. Yeah, so
Yeah, they're
different.
like sentient on their own. So I think yeah, no, but Transformers is a great comparison too, just for visual sake. So yeah, so my first foray into sci-fi, this is my first foray into sci-fi. I started writing this because I love giant robots so much. It's not that I love sci-fi. It's that I mean I do, but it's that I love giant robots more. And giant robots don't really fit in a fantasy setting that well, right? Like there needs to be, they do, you can make them work, but there needs to be like my main thought process was like, how do giant robots function, right? Like, because gravity is such a hindrance to
It's
like
a pain.
being
Yeah,
huge. Sorry,
gravity is a pain.
it is a pain. It's true. Like, it's the biggest hindrance to being big, right? Like whales evolved to be huge because they are under less gravity, right? They are under the effects of gravity much less. Like sea giganticism is a thing, right? So I was like, okay, so what if we put robots in a place where there is no gravity? Do they thrive? Do they thrive there? And then once I started thinking about that, I was like, what do we call these robots? And for some reason in my head, it popped into my head. It was like, what if we call them steeds? And from there, I was like, oh, you mean steed? I was like talking to my own brain. I was like, you mean steeds as in like medieval jousting? Like, you know, horses, right? Like medieval horses. My brain was like, yes. And I was like, what are you, what are you talking about, brain? And so it all kind of just spiraled from there because Heavenbreaker is a medieval. I decided to mash together a futuristic, far futuristic sci-fi with medieval concepts like knights and like the peasant class and like kings, right? I really enjoy when writing taking really disparate themes and mashing them together because I think it makes a compelling sort of landscape to write in, right? Opposites are always interesting because people always be like, oh, I didn't know you could combine these two things. So yeah, so the giant robots are really just a vehicle. It's not so much I wanted to write sci-fi; I just wanted to write giant robots. Um, but I do enjoy space operas. I did enjoy Dune. I do love David Lynch's Dune for all its flaws. It's like one of my favorite movies. But yeah, so that's how I started writing it.
What's your this is now we'll go over to the process side, which, as I said,
Mhm.
this podcast focused on exclusively for 150 episodes. So I still like to still like to put that in.
Yeah.
So what is your process when you're writing a new book? Are you a heavy
Mm.
planner, or do you just start writing and see what comes out?
Yeah, I'm one of those people where if I plan out the book, if I outline it with all the details, I'm like, oh, I finished writing the book.
Hmm.
Oh, it's done. Oh, I don't need to write the book anymore. It's already planned. Look, my brain, for some reason, whenever I plan the book out, it's like, oh, I don't need to write it. I know what happens. So for me, I'm definitely a pantser because part of the joy of writing comes from the exploration, right? Like the excuse me, the new twists and turns that happen when writing are what keeps me engaged with it rather than an outline, a strict outline.
What does your writing regimen look like? Are you a
Ah,
certain number of hours a day, or more? Today I'll do 12 hours, and tomorrow I won't do any.
wow. 12 hours. Yeah. Have you ever done a 12-hour writing bender?
No, I tend to write in about 2-hour sessions. Then if I relocate, I can go on for another couple of hours. Most I've ever done
Ah,
in a week, though, when I was doing nothing but writing, I did
yeah.
50,000 words in a week once. So I
Wow.
can be fast if I really don't have anything else going on.
Were
The
they
trouble
good
is,
words?
it was the main section of a 150,000 word novel, so I did a third of the novel in
Wow.
that week, and
Wow.
most of them were still in the book when it was finished.
Wow. That's so impressive. Wow. Yeah, I
That
don't think
doesn't
I
happen
could.
very often.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like once in a blue moon.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think I could do 50,000 words in a week. I think my process in general, especially in general, is that I sit down and try to like write at least like 500 words a day. Is like my minimum, right? And then the maximum can be whatever ceiling I'm feeling like. I usually get my best work done in the morning. And it's after I exercise usually. But for Heavenbreaker, I sat down. We were in quarantine during Heavenbreaker, so I sat down and I wrote about 2,000 words a day. And just had like it was a really episodic sort of feeling. Sometimes you write and the flow kind of like stops and starts.
Hmm.
But for Heavenbreaker, I just wrote in episodic spurts that kind of were closed and contained in on themselves. Like I sat down, like, okay, today there's an episode, right? And I would write it to its completion, and then I would walk away and maybe come back and edit it and all that stuff. But for Heavenbreaker, it was so strange because I just wrote it in like self-contained episodes that became a story, which was really interesting and a different way to do things for me.
Once you have a draft, what does your
Mm.
revision process look like? Do you have beta
uh,
readers, or how do you work?
yeah, so I don't usually have beta readers. I don't have
I've
many.
never had them, but so many do that I
Really?
always ask. Yes.
Yeah. Me neither. I just don't have that many author friends who have time on their hands, right? Like
Hmm.
people have kids, people have jobs, people have lives. And so I'm not particularly close with a lot of people in the writing community. I have become recently though, with Heavenbreaker, I've become recently friends with some people. Yeah. So it's been really nice. I don't have beta readers typically. But if I'm struggling in a scene, what I will do is I'll pass it over to somebody I trust, right? Like, hey, can you read this and tell me what's wrong with it? But for revisions wise, I go from start to finish. I go from like, I do passes of the entire book based on usually my agent's advice. Usually it's my agent. My agent is Caitlin Blasdale. She's incredible with science fiction and fantasy, and she knows exactly what needs to happen, right? So she goes through and says like, this could happen here, this could happen here, and I'm like, all right, I'll make it work if I agree with it. So for Heavenbreaker, I think I had upwards of 7 revisions before we went on submission, just because the world I built bare bones wasn't quite a science fiction novel. It was a it was mostly focused on the competition of jousting, right? There was no like outer politics, there was no like
Hmm.
space station politics. And so Caitlin was like, you need to put some of these in here, and I was like, all right. So yeah, that's it was 7 revisions
So it's
before
world building
submission.
stuff, basically,
Yes,
fleshing out the
exactly.
world,
Yeah. And then once we
shaping
get
the world. One might say, this being the
one
World
might say
Shapers.
shaping the world. Oh, we dropped the title. I love that. Yeah. So then after I got bought by Red Tower, then it was like 3 or 4 extra revisions. So I tend to do a lot of revisions because my first drafts are pretty bare bones in terms of world building. Mm.
What kind of editorial feedback do you typically get? Because editors always come back and there's still more stuff to be done.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Usually I get like, hey, what does this mean? It's pretty common because I tend to write in an art. I'm kind of artsy fartsy purple prose with it. And so my editor will be like, is this really necessary type deal? I do get repetitive comments a lot. I sometimes I don't trust myself or my readers, even though I should learn to trust myself and my readers. And so I'll repeat something in order to make it important, but it starts to grind on the reader,
Hmm.
and so that will come back a lot. Repetitive is one that comes back a lot. Yeah, with Red Tower, of course, like they are a romance focused imprint, so they were like, hey, question mark smut. And I was like, okay, I'll try. So I did my best to get some in there, worm some of those in there. But yeah, those are the major revisions.
So the book is actually out on May 21st is the release date. Is that right?
Yeah.
So this will go live just before that.
That's
So I guess
exciting.
I can't ask you how the reception has been from readers necessarily, but
Yeah.
presumably there are reviewers and stuff looking at it. Have you been
Yes.
pleased with the pre-release attention it's been getting?
Well, yeah, I try not to look at reviews, right?
Oh,
We're all authors and we try not to look at reviews. I mean, some people like to look at them. How do you deal with them personally?
I look at them unless they are, if they're just meh, I'll still look at them. But just to give, this is a horrible example, but it's absolutely true. The book
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking about in the trilogy under as E.C. Blake, first book in
Mm-hmm.
that trilogy was probably my best-selling book ever.
Wow.
But it got hit by somebody on Goodreads who goes around trashing books.
Oh
And
no.
so the very first, and she has followers, so the
Oh
reviews starts at the, shows up at the first if you're looking at the
yeah.
review of the book. And I believe the first review still says, this is not so much high fantasy as it is toilet paper. I think that's how it starts.
Yo, that's such a diss track. Oh my God, they
I
should become
have
a
not read that
rapper.
review.
Yeah, maybe don't read that one. That is, oh my gosh, yeah,
But if
that
it's just,
happens.
if it's, I don't care otherwise. You see
Yeah,
some nice things. And if it's mildly critical, I could say, yeah, well, maybe. But it
yeah.
doesn't really affect me when it comes to writing,
Hmm.
I don't think. But yeah, I do know people who absolutely avoid them. And it probably is a good idea for the most part.
Oh yeah, I
But
always advise starting writers don't read the reviews. You don't need those. Those aren't for you.
I remember a Peanuts cartoon. Was it a
Uh-huh.
Peanuts cartoon? Well, there was a Peanuts cartoon. That's a different one. But somewhere I read that what every author really wants in a review is 12,000 words of closely reasoned praise. That's what you're looking for.
It's true and real. I think my favorite review, I think my favorite review I've ever gotten was a one sentence review, and it still sticks with me to this day. And it was a positive review, and it said, because I tend to write my books with cliffhangers,
Mm-hmm.
and so the reviewer said, Sarah Wolf isn't seeing heaven for that one. And I think about it every day because it's such a funny review. And it's like it's so visceral and it's so like encapsulates like a reader's experience, right? Like when you just I've been there, right? I've been there when the author does something and I'm like, you're not, you're bad, you're bad, you're a bad person for making me love this book so much and then giving me a cliffhanger, you know? So I really love that review above all other reviews. So yeah, so the reception seems to have been pretty positive. I try to just sort of loosely gloss over reviews because they're not for authors, right? Reviews are for people.
Yeah.
I always say like if they've bothered to read your words, like you've already won, so to speak. Like you know what I mean? Like if someone has read what you're writing, they've spent their life force reading what you're writing. So no matter what, you're kind of you kind of come out the winner here, whether or not they like it. And it's not so much a win or lose situation. It's just that like you people have bothered to read your words. That's a huge thing. Like people sacrifice their time for you, right? That is huge in of itself. You've already accomplished something just by like having people read the words, no matter what they think of it.
Especially with so much other stuff out there they could be doing with their time.
Absolutely, yeah. Like time is a valuable resource, so I always appreciate every reviewer, no matter whether it's positive or negative, right? So yeah, I think the response has been good. People are saying they want more smut, and I was like, listen, I'm sorry, there'll be more, I promise. But like in the second book, this was about world building. Listen, there needs to be setup. But yeah, I'm a big sucker for like pining and stuff and slow burn romance. So that's what this book is.
I must confess I have never had the editorial comment, needs more smut. That's not one from my publishers.
It's a fun experience. I hope you get it someday, you know, just to round out your writing experience.
Yeah, it
But
seems
yeah.
unlikely.
Yeah. You never know.
Unless I start writing for romance publishers, I guess.
It's true. It's true. It's true. The romance community has been so like helpful and supportive. I think in a lot of ways, the science fiction community, from what I've seen so far, and the romance community are very similar in that they're super passionate about like their specific genre, right? Like super, like they're people know all these authors and they put a lot of energy and love into the book. So
Well,
yeah, I
the
really
romance
appreciate it.
community, though, is a lot larger than the science fiction community.
It's true. That's true. But I think the passion remains the same. I think the
Yeah,
passion remains similar.
it's true of any genre that you might be writing in. There are those really passionate
Yeah.
fans, whether it's thrillers or crime fiction. Detective
Mhm.
novels certainly have their fans as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it's true.
So, what are you working on now?
I am working on the sequel to Heavenbreaker, Hellrunner.
Oh,
Yeah. So Heavenbreaker and Hellrunner are actually two robots in the book. They're named. All the robots are named things like Ghostwinder and like Hellrunner and Sin Eater. Like really, really edgy, dramatic names because I love that when you name something dramatically. So yeah, Heavenbreaker and Hellrunner are two robots. They're the two most important robots in the entire book. So yeah, book number 2 is Hellrunner. Yippee!
how many books do you envision in the series?
So I think this is a duology. I think this specifically is a duology,
Well,
but
so you don't
the
have to come up with another matching name for the, you know,
how did you know? Oh no. It's like
purgatory something, I guess would be the next one.
yeah, it's like you write or something. It's like you know this. But yeah, so I think the world itself has many, many opportunities because there are 6 other space stations, and this focuses on one space station. There are 6 others that were made during the war, and they were flung across different distant space times. So they're all spread out across the universe. So I could definitely hone in on these 6 other space stations, or like 1 or 2 for another book. But this space station, try saying space station like 5 times fast.
Space station, space station, space station, space station, space station, space
Wow,
station.
you got it.
Well, I'm a
You
science
got it.
fiction writer, so.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so this space station in particular, I think the story is going to be 2 books, and then I'll probably move on to another space station. I was thinking of doing so. This space station floats around a gas giant, and has a sort of medieval, like a king and a medieval jousting tournament, all that. But I was thinking for the next one, for the next space station, what if it was on a water planet and it kind of had a pirate theme to it? Like drawing, yeah. Like what if we mix giant robots and pirates? So I'm excited about exploring that sort of time mashup, like the time eras mashup.
Sounds like fun anyway.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy writing? Is it fun for you?
Wow, what a loaded question. You just snuck that one at the end, huh? I do love writing. It's the closest you're going to get to making magic real in this world. And not only that, but it allows you to explore yourself and your own personal growth. Every book is kind of a milestone of where you were in your life. It's a snapshot of who you were. And I appreciate writing for that, because I can look back and be like, wow, that's my life. You know what I mean? I know exactly where I was when I wrote this, like mentally. And I also love that people happen to love it too. It's nice that other people like these snapshots of my life. So, of course, I love writing, but I also hate it.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, it is like that. And where can people keep up with what you are doing online?
Yes. So I have my website. It should be author.sarawolf.com is my website. You can go there and check out all the things that are happening. But I'm pretty active. All news goes through my Instagram. I'm also I am woo. I am also author Sara Wolf on Instagram, where I post all the latest news, where I'm signing, all that kind of thing. And then I have a Twitter, which is Sarah_Wolf1. So yeah.
I always appreciate encountering somebody who didn't manage to get the same handle on all of the social media. Because
let me tell you,
I didn't. They're all different.
Yeah. Can you like I think the person who has Sara Wolf is like, I don't know, some sort of, I don't know. It's just like, I don't want to message them and be like, hey, can I have this? It's just a little bit awkward. I'm fine with the Sarah_Wolf1. It just takes a little bit longer to say. That's all.
When I went on Twitter, which was years and years ago, I didn't even do anything on it for years and years.
Yeah.
I just used Willett, like nothing. And now, of course, on Instagram, I'm Edward Willett author, and on so it's I'm always constantly at the end of the podcast here when I do all the links, I have to go through every one of those, and they're all different.
Oh gosh, oh my god, yeah. I mean, shout out to social media. The social media grind for authors is so real, and I appreciate you for doing what you do, and yeah, it's difficult. It's not easy.
Well, thanks so much for being on. It's my first interview with anime wolf, so wolf girl. So
thank you for having me. I really appreciate you. It's really nice to talk to somebody with so much experience. And your questions were so like light but easy, and also very fun. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks again to Sara for that chat. That's the first time I have conducted an interview with an animated wolf girl. But it was fun, and Sara was a great guest. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did, and I hope she did too. That's it for this time. Just some housekeeping stuff to remind you that you can find the Worldshapers online at theworldshapers.com. All the back episodes are there. Some of them even have transcripts, back before I realized I couldn't keep up that level of detail. But there's links, social media links, and all that stuff to each of the authors, pictures of their books, and things like that. That's at theworldshapers.com. Also links to the audio-only version of this podcast. You are probably watching this on my YouTube channel, Edward Willett, youtube.com/Edward Willett. So that's another place you can find the Worldshapers podcast. You can find it on Twitter at the Worldshapers, and you can find it on Facebook at the Worldshapers. I mentioned Shadowpaw Press off the top. Shadowpaw Press is at shadowpawpress.com. You can find it on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press, on Twitter at Shadowpaw Press, and on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. Finally managed to get all of the the same handles on that one in the Worldshapers, but when it comes to me, I did not. My website is edwardwillett.com. Very straightforward. On Twitter, I'm at ewillett. On Facebook, I'm at edward.willett. On Instagram, I'm at edwardwillettauthor. And as I mentioned, YouTube, I am Edward Willett. At least I got that one with the simplest possible handle. One thing you can find on this YouTube channel, besides these Worldshapers episodes, are my walks around Regina, Saskatchewan. I do live-streamed walks several days a week, not every day a week. It used to be every day a week, but I had to, time and all that. And of course, they're also recorded. You can go back and look at, if you want to, you can go walk with me 3 years ago, walking around Regina, Saskatchewan. So that's something else to check out. And of course, as you know, here's the podcast on my YouTube channel, and it will be back again next week with another author. I hope you will join me, and I hope you will continue to join me in the future as I continue to talk to a variety of authors about their latest books. That's it for this time. Bye for now.